Well, thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon, stepping into your career. I'm super excited for today's panel. First, wanted to give a shout out though to our sponsors. Without them, it's really difficult to give these opportunities back to our early careerists and our students and our overall ACHE members. Today, we've got Sarah Johnson with us, who's going to be moderating our event. So I'm really excited for that. In the chat, you will notice I've put in some links for our students and for our early careerists. If you're not yet a member of IHIN, the local Indianapolis chapter of ACHE, I encourage you to sign up. If you're a student, it is free. We do have some vouchers going on right now, so I would encourage you to take that opportunity. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Sarah. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. We have a wonderful group of panelists with us. We are going to be focusing on really how to get started in your career, whether that be the first job search or maybe one of those early job searches as you work through those first few roles in your professional life. So to get us started, I'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves. We're going to go around and I'm going to ask you to share your name, the year you graduated, I know, time, your major, when you graduated, and your current position and employer. So Katie I'm actually going to have you kick things off for us.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you guys for having me today. My name's Katie O'Risky, and I graduated in 2018 with my bachelor's in health services management, and then in 2019 with my master's of health administration. So I currently serve as a senior associate at Whitkeefer, which is an executive healthcare search firm. I serve specifically on our interim leadership team, where I hire interim executives for healthcare clients across the nation.
Wonderful, thank you. Katie D, I'm going to kick it over to you.
Sounds good. Well, thank you for letting me join today. I graduated in 2017 with my bachelor's in health services management. I currently work for Community Health Network. I've worked for them since I graduated. I also did an internship with them, and I currently serve as a provider recruiter, recruiting advanced practice providers throughout the network on primary care side.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but not least, Brianne, over to you.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here tonight. My name is Brianne Carizia, and I graduated with Katie in May of 2018 from the Health Services Management Program. And I'm currently the HR manager at the Riley Children's Foundation, which is the fundraising arm of Riley Children's Health.
Perfect, thank you all. And again, hopefully everyone's starting to notice there's a lot of similar background here in terms of that HR perspective. So these folks are truly the experts when it comes to the job search, what goes well in interviews, what to look for in job descriptions, and of course, the negotiating side of things. And those are going to be our focus areas tonight. Now, before we enter into each of those specific topics, I think it would be helpful for us just to get a better sense of what your current roles really look like. So if you could each share a little bit about your primary responsibilities, because they are somewhat varied in your different employment situations, but also could you maybe give us a sense of, I know there's no average day, but what would a random day look like? So maybe think of Tuesday of this week. What did that look like for you? So Brianna, I'm going to start on your end this time.
I laugh because I think we can all agree in HR, you never know what to expect and there's never 2 days alike. But as HR manager, my main functions are recruiting, hiring, onboarding. We have a staff of about 60 employees with not tons of turnover, but we're starting to expand and start an internship program. So that's a big part of my focus. I also handle a lot of our internal professional development. So I'm a Gallup certified Clifton Strengths coach. So that's something that we use with all of our employees and interns. And then I also deal with a lot of our building logistics. I kind of tell people it's my job to make sure that our fundraisers are comfortable and they're out raising a bunch of money for the kids at Riley. So I'm making sure that people know where to park, people have a keyboard, all of kind of those behind the scenes things I take care of to make sure our staff has the resources they need to do their jobs.
Wonderful. Katie O, over to you.
Yeah. So at a high level, my primary responsibilities are to identify executives to fill our clients' needs on an interim basis, and I'll dive into that in a second. But clients come to us for an interim whenever they've had an unexpected departure and do not have succession planning in place for that role. So we're constantly working to fill those searches, but then also just to build up our talent pool to have people kind of in our back pocket whenever these clients come to us so that we move at a fast pace. So like Brianne said, my day looks different every single day, which is something that I actually really enjoy about my role. So our priorities are constantly changing since we move at a pretty fast pace. I start my day with a morning huddle with my team where we talk about every single one of our active searches, getting who we have on the search, where we're at with interviews, kind of keeping a pulse on it. We then talk about any of our potential searches to kind of keep those on the radar, and then any other issues that might arise. And then from there, I dive into the daily activities of either interviewing candidates for specific projects, sourcing candidates, facilitating client interviews, meeting with clients to understand a little bit more about their needs, or just continuing to screen candidates to be added into our talent pool. We then have another afternoon huddle where we talk about any developments that we've had since the morning. And just to give you an idea about how quickly we move, we could have a client come to us, we present candidates, interview, and then get someone started with that client in a matter of 7 to 10 days. And so very fast, and things are changing constantly on our team. So we talk a lot and collaborate a lot just to stay on top of it. But yeah, we have kind of our main functions are filling our clients' immediate needs, and then continuing to fill our database and talent pool with qualified interim executives that are interested, that are kind of just been sitting on our bench.
My goodness, that's a lot. Thank you. Katie D, over to you.
Thank you. So I handle advanced practice provider recruitment for Community Health Network. So that's Community Health Network as a whole, all across Central Indiana, primary care specific. So I hire internal medicine, family medicine. Currently I have a diabetes management opportunity, but my primary focus would be like family medicine, internal medicine, then our on-demand care. So our Walgreens and MedCheck clinics. And I recruit, retain, source candidates, always interviewing. I'm very busy because they are very many of them, a lot of new grads, and then a lot of seasoned APPs, which advanced practice providers are going to be nurse practitioners and physician assistants. So I feel a little bit different than the others that are joining us on this call, but my day-to-day looks very different. Some of it's interviewing, some of it's looking at creating ads for those roles, talking with my key leaders to see what's going on in their region, if there's any new opportunities that need to be posted or searched upon, checking my applicants, planning site visits. I'm always busy and always doing something different.
Wonderful. Well, variety is definitely the theme across all of these. And I'm excited because you all are definitely the experts in the topics that we're going to be talking about tonight, given what you're saying your primary responsibilities are. So let's get started by thinking about sort of that first step in any job search, which is identifying what positions someone might want to apply to. And of course, as we know, there's a tendency to immediately transition to that online search. And so, what do you see as sort of the top advice you have for people who are starting when they look online? Where should they be looking? How do they ensure they not miss a really fantastic opportunity? And should they exclusively be looking online? I'm going to open it up and let anyone jump in who wants to.
I can go. So for me, getting out and graduating, I would say I found my job word of mouth. It was who I know, talking to them, getting an internship, and then turning that into a full-time job. And I think, going out to career fairs and having discussions with your peers and just talking to them and asking, do you know anybody that works at IU or community that you could get me in touch with? I think that was super helpful for my job search. And I would ask and tell anybody to use your resources.
Mm-hmm. I totally agree with you, Katie. And I think informational interviews can be really helpful. That's something I did a lot of in college. And while one of them turned into an internship, none of them really turned into a full-time job right after. It helped me get connections to then get jobs later on. So I'm on my third professional role after I left IUPUI. And I got this role through LinkedIn, but I knew some people already because of my informational interviewing at Riley Children's Foundation. I reached out to, could you tell me more about this position? What's the work culture like? So just, making those connections and keeping up with those connections as well is really important. Also on the job searching front, one thing of when you do search online, don't let a title intimidate you or don't let, just because it says you need 2 years of experience and I don't have any. If it's a job that you're really passionate about and you have some of the qualifications, it doesn't hurt to apply. The worst they can do is say no. So don't let those titles especially limit you.
And I would reiterate everything that they just said. I got every single one of my 3 jobs that I've had by making a connection with the previous job, and it just led to that new job and those leaders seeing opportunities. But yeah, I think searching online can be pretty overwhelming. There's a lot of places to go to, and people that haven't done it before don't know. I personally enjoy using LinkedIn, looking at the jobs on LinkedIn. You can find specific companies, follow those companies, and then you can also set up job notifications on there. If you're looking in a certain area or you want remote based on previous title searches, you can kind of get notifications of, hey, they've posted this many new jobs in that kind of category this week. And I'm not searching for a job, but I get that in my email all the time. And so, but yeah, I think networking is definitely something that's more important right now than it ever has been. Even just reaching out. I've also found at my old job when I worked at IU Health, sometimes people would apply to a job and you get so many applications and you're sorting through them and looking at them. But I've found sometimes people would find me, don't know how they found me on LinkedIn, but they would find me, send me a message and say, hey, just want to let you know I applied to this job. And it kind of adds a little bit of an extra touch to that and lets them know that you are interested. And even though maybe their resume didn't stand out that much, they're kind of making that additional effort to reach out to you. And I think that's incredibly important. And you can do that, find recruiters, find hiring leaders, and just sell yourself.
Absolutely. LinkedIn can be such a powerful tool, as can professional organizations like ACHE and IHEN. So just again, a plug for students, especially take advantage of that free membership and make the most of those networking connections. Brianne, I want to double back to a comment that you made related to this idea of years of experience. And I know that early careerists, recent grads, this is something that tends to really intimidate people. They look at job descriptions and they see 3 to 5 years of experience, 1 to 3 years of experience, 0 to 5 years of experience. What does that actually mean for your perspective as the HR representative on the other side? How are you all utilizing those years of experience? That might help our job seekers better understand what that really means to them. And I'll let anyone jump in.
Yeah. On the years of experience, it's not necessarily meaning you have to have this exact job title for this many years. Whenever I see a resume, I'm going through to look at certain skills. Have they been working on a team for that many years? Have they been doing other core functions of the job for that many years? And what kind of experiences do they have? I will also say, just from like the HR side of it, the behind the scenes side, there's a lot of job boards out there that require you to put certain information on job boards just to be able to post. So sometimes I may have to put at least 2 years of experience, but I'd be willing to consider somebody else. So there's sometimes even limitations for us. And I'm sure both Katie's can probably attest to this as well when posting online, that sometimes we're limited as well.
Yeah, I would agree. For my opportunities, I will say it's a little bit different since I am looking at advanced practice providers. Some of them are going into solo clinics, so I do need the experience required. So from that standpoint, it is different, but I know when I was searching for a job, having experience or no experience and applying for opportunities, it didn't necessarily mean that I would need that experience. But for my specific roles, I would say that I'm very you have to have it, but I know that it's different for everyone else right now.
Mm-hmm. And I would say the same as Katie. It's kind of different for me. I hire for executives, so they've already got 20, 30 plus years of experience in the field. But for my own job search, I don't think that any job that I've taken I was qualified for, but I was able to get my foot in the door somewhere and show that, yes, I have my education, I have some of this experience, but the willingness to learn and portraying that I think is really important as well.
Wonderful, thank you. Another common concern that comes up when people are filtering through these job descriptions and trying to understand what's the right fit for them, what are they the right fit for, this issue of keywords and titles. How did you all navigate that in your own job search when you have looked online? How have you noticed applicants navigating that? I think people get really hung up on specific titles, or they get really hung up on a specific keyword they think their job that they're looking for is aligned with. What is your advice around that?
That's a great question. I'll go first. I don't have a great example from my own career search because I got my job through one of the health services management internships that just turned into a full-time role somewhere else in the organization. And then I continued to make those connections. But I think that keywords are tricky because coming out of school, I had no idea whenever didn't have my internship, I had no idea what I wanted to do. So I knew I liked to work on projects. I was pretty good at project management. So I was just trying to search some sort of like project-based jobs. And I think people can get, like you said, Sarah, it's overwhelming. You can get kind of really stuck into looking at a certain job. This is what I want to do. This is what you think you want to do. And that will limit your search a lot. And so as much as you can open it up and maybe just, if you know you want to work for certain types of organizations, maybe going to those organizational websites, searching through their jobs versus the abundance of jobs that you might have on LinkedIn or on a different career site, and just reading through it. And also if you can talk to any one of the organizations that you know works there. Hey, I still have people will reach out to me because I used to work at IU Health and they're like, hey, Katie, I want to apply to a job in this department. Do you kind of think that would be a fit with my background? Or if you can find anyone that has an inside source onto what they would actually do and be able to tell you if they think your experience would be a fit or if you think you like it. And then also what I can't remember who alluded to it earlier, but the informal conversations. You can talk to someone that's in HR at an organization and just kind of have those questions and ask what they're seeing, where their advice might be based on what you're looking for. I think that's important. So a couple things, but.
Yeah, I know one thing that I did when I was originally job searching out of college was if I found a job that I liked, I would try and find somebody with that same title at a similar organization. And again, play the student card of, I just want to learn. I want to learn about what you do. And 9 times out of 10, they're going to talk to you. So finding similar roles as well. And again, not being hung up on the title, but really looking at what's in the job description of, are these things that I want to do and I'm qualified to do? And if the majority of those tasks are a yes, then you might as well apply.
Yeah, I agree with both Katie and Bree. I would say I was similar to Katie where I had an internship and then was able and lucky enough to come on full-time with community. But when I was looking, before I knew that there was a full-time opportunity, I knew to look for within the organization the words like associate or project coordinator, because I talked with others, word of mouth again, to try to figure out where would somebody that's fresh out of college, what kind of jobs should I look for? But again, I think a main part of looking for a job is just talking to those and reaching out to people that you know and talking into HR. And I am always happy to answer anybody's questions on LinkedIn. I do get quite a few that ask, where do I even start? Or is there somebody that I can connect with? And then I can connect them with the right person. So I would say to just use your resources. It helps so much.
Absolutely. Let's start to transition now into the world of interviewing. So let's say we found our great position, we've been called for an interview. This is something you all have experience with on both sides of the table in most cases. So what would be your top piece of advice to someone as they're preparing for an interview, either on the preparation side or are sitting in that interview themselves?
My top piece of advice would be know the job description. I know from personal experience, when I was about to graduate from IUPUI, I was applying to tons of jobs. And a couple times I would get on a phone call and think, okay, I know this organization, but what job did I apply for? So make sure you stay organized, and recruiters can tell. Whenever I'm talking with applicants, I can tell if they've read the job description. I can tell if they've looked up our organization. It's interesting with us because we're Riley Children's Foundation. A lot of people assume that we are the hospital, and while everything we do benefits them, we are two separate entities. We are our own nonprofit. So just do your research, come prepared, and also come prepared with questions. Whenever I get to the end of an interview, especially we do a phone screen first off, which is just a 30-minute quick phone screen. When someone says, I have no questions, to me, that means maybe you aren't interested anymore. So just come prepared with some questions, even if they've answered everything. Odds are there's something you can think of about ask about the culture, ask about, other things that happen in the organization, not just position related.
Yeah, I would reiterate everything Brianna just said. And then also, it's very basic, but one thing that I always got advice about, and that I think definitely differentiates candidates when I'm talking to them, is being able to hold a conversation. That seems very basic, but some people come to interviews, they're very nervous. They just want to be all about the business and talk about the job. But for me, I like to have a conversation that's engaging. Someone can feel comfortable asking me questions. And some advice that I got one time that I've used and I feel like works, to let the other person know, like, hey, it's okay to lighten up a little bit. It kind of lightens the mood. But if someone asks you how you are, you can provide your answer, but then provide a reason why. Like, it could be as simple as, I'm doing great today, the sun's shining and spring's around the corner, or it's Thursday, which is almost Friday. I use that all the time. But it just really lightens the mood, and I think it gets people to laugh on the other end, and they kind of seem to take a sigh and a deep breath, and they lighten up just a little bit. So I think that's important. What Bree said about bringing questions and know the job description. If you can ask questions related to those job functions, that in a recruiter's mind is like, okay, they read the job, they're really trying to evaluate if they're going to be a good fit or not. And that's also equally as important. Don't be afraid to ask questions that might be, I don't know the right word, but sometimes candidates, I feel like, are afraid to ask questions that might make the interviewer think, but you need to evaluate them as much as they're evaluating you, and make sure it's going to be a good fit, because they in the end want you to be successful in the role, and it's going to cost them a lot of money if you just take the job because you want it and then end up turning over. And then, sorry, I took notes because I had a lot of advice. Be able to answer the questions that they're asking with experiences related to the functions of the role. If you can tie those back to those functions and expectations, definitely going to put you up on the list. And then be prepared to have an example of a time that you failed and what you learned from it. I feel like that's a question that's getting asked a lot now. And they're asking that question to see that you can accept feedback and grow from your mistakes, and not that you, if you come to answer that question with, I've never had a failure, or I've never made a mistake, just don't do that, because that's not a good one. But I see that getting asked a lot more now.
Yeah, I think that that's all great advice, and I would piggyback off of everything you guys have said. Do your research, know about the company, know about the job that you're applying, ask questions. It's a red flag if my candidates don't ask me questions. Practice before, like, look up behavioral based questions and just practice. I know diversity, equity, inclusion is a huge part of everything now. Look up questions and have good answers for that. Professionalism, dressing professional, speaking professional. Bring copies of your CV. You don't always see that anymore. And I think that that's a nice personal touch to have. And ask to shadow. If you are super interested in the job, ask if you can shadow for an hour or two. And always send a follow-up thank you note. I think that that kind of sets you apart from other candidates as well. I think those are my main points, which you guys all touched on.
Wonderful, really helpful advice there. I just want to piggyback on a comment that sort of came up buried in there, was this idea of phone interviews versus the more formal in-person or longer Zoom. I know sometimes we've altered to fully virtual even for final round interviews. Help us as applicants better understand, put on your HR hats. What are you trying to understand in a phone interview? And how does that differ from what you're trying to understand in a later round interview for the applicant to be keeping in mind as they prepare for those two different types of interviews?
For me, we do strictly phone and video now, but I'll talk about my previous organization where we did phone and then in person. And I think typically the recruiter is the first step. You do the phone screen, and I think that's more of a very high level. Are they going to be a good cultural fit, and do they have the technical skills that are required for this job? And then you would take that on to the hiring leader, and then the hiring leader would further assess for their fit and maybe some more in-depth technical questions, because as a recruiter, you're usually recruiting for various departments where you might not have the in-depth technical knowledge that each area is going to need. But I think, most organizations have a basic set of list of questions where you have a question about two questions that are going to hit on the culture, your mission, vision, values, those kinds of things, and then a couple functional technical questions as well. And so I think in the very beginning, that first phone screen interview is going to be important to understand the organization's mission and how you can, and their culture and how you can relate. So questions that you could ask would be based off their culture and mission and those kinds of things. And then just understanding the job as well. And also sometimes recruiters don't know, maybe I'm speaking for myself, but we didn't always know going into a search. If we didn't have time to talk to the hiring leader, we didn't know a whole lot about the role. We were kind of rolling with just some very vague information. And so you kind of talk briefly about it, but really that first HR piece to me is cultural and then high level kind of technical.
Yeah, my organization works like the exact same way as far as, why we do certain things. And with the piece about, HR being the intro, I was recently recruiting for a data analyst. I'm not a data analyst. So in one of my phone screens, one of the applicants was just rattling off all of these different program names and all of these different things. And that didn't mean anything to me. I wrote it all down and told the hiring manager. But like Katie said, that first, especially if you're meeting with someone from HR, learning about the culture, asking about the organization as a whole is really going to help you out. And then later on in the interview process is normally when the hiring managers are saying, okay, do you have the skill? Do you have experience doing this specifically? But also don't let that limit your questions. Before, I've had applicants ask me very technical questions and I'll say, I'm not sure, but I'll pass that along to the hiring manager. So they can either respond to it or bring it up in the interview. So don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. I would say that mine is very similar. Their first phone screen is going to be with me, and it's basic questions just to get to know them, figuring out what sets them apart from my other candidates that I have. So really talking about your experience and what's brought you to this point in your career is kind of where my main focus is, as well as asking the general HR questions and figuring out what their schedule they want it to look like. Are they board certified or board eligible? What their salary expectations are, asking them what's their top 3 criteria to accept an opportunity. That question really stumps a lot of my candidates, and they're like, let me think about that, because they don't always want to say, pay, because even though that is important to them, they don't want that to be a factor that stands out. So I would say to make sure that they're the great cultural fit, all of mine are phone screens to start. And then from there, they have another phone screen with the clinical staff, because I am not clinical and I know nothing about the clinical side. But like Briam said, I have a lot of people that will tell me all their clinical knowledge and ask me clinical questions. And I do the same thing where I appreciate that. I will pass that along. And then from there, we usually bring them on site so that they can meet the clinic and meet everyone that they would future be working with.
Wonderful, thank you. It helps to demystify things a little bit here and there. So sort of in the same vein of interviewing, when we think about what you are looking for in an applicant, I know we've been thinking about things a lot from that really early careerist student mindset. Let's shift a little bit. Let's think about somebody who's been working in the field for a number of years, and you are recruiting someone to move into a manager or leadership style position. And this is going to be a new leader, a new manager. What would really set someone apart who's in that transition period? We all know what that phase looks like, where you're getting started, you have some professional experience, but now you're trying to go for that first manager role or that first leadership role. What do you look for in those applicants? How do they stand out?
I know for me, when recruiting for roles like that, a lot of it's about confidence and kind of not letting that imposter syndrome get in the way. Before, I've had candidates say, well, I would like to be able to do this, or I think I could do this. No, say you're going to do it. Be confident, be firm about it. So that's kind of my biggest piece of advice, is to, really talk about your experiences that you've had, brag on yourself. That's the point of an interview. Us as recruiters, we want to know your successes and what you're proud of. But also don't be afraid to, throw out an idea or be, firm about what your plan of action is going forward.
Yeah. I think something important to look for in people is if they receive feedback well, because whenever you go to a new leader position, you're potentially going to be, if you're staying within the same role, team, you're potentially going to be then managing people that were your coworkers. And so you're going to have to be able to provide feedback whenever it's uncomfortable. And I think a good measurement of that is if you can receive good feedback and act on it, you're probably going to be able to provide feedback pretty well in an uncomfortable situation. And I think listening to people and how they talk about accomplishments is important, because you'll listen to people's answers sometimes and they talk about, I did this, I did this, I did this, but a lot of those accomplishments are not get executed without a team. And so I think that's something important to try to draw out, is because if they're going to talk about not that they're not going to be a good leader, but it's important that people that understand relationships and collaborative environments usually answer in more of a team oriented answer.
I would agree. And then I just kind of look for genuine connection and the want to develop themselves as well as others and make sure that they can effectively communicate and lead a team.
Fantastic. Thank you all for that. Let's transition into the world of negotiation. This is one that I know people feel incredibly uncomfortable with. And so I think your advice is going to be really helpful to our group as a whole. So I have a couple specific questions here. Let's start with the first one. When is it the right time in this process to even begin to talk about things like salary and to negotiate and to be putting our negotiation hat on?
I think the very first call, not necessarily start negotiating, but just getting an understanding. I always try to provide that whenever I would talk to someone very initially, just so that they can either self-select out if they don't think it's going to be a good match, or if they still want to explore it a little bit more, maybe it does align with them and they have no questions. Or if it does not align, they can ask kind of, is there going to be a little bit of wiggle room based on my experience and what I'd be bringing to the table? And then they would obviously have their chance to kind of sell themselves and provide the information on why they'd be a benefit to the organization. But I think that first initial conversation, you don't necessarily have to ask, well, what are you going to pay this person, but can ask kind of what the market rate's going, what's budgeted for this role. Some recruiters don't like to be asked that question, but I always like to provide it because you're going to get asked it anyways. So I think that very first one, but then you get into the conversation later down the road if it were to lead to an offer and it wasn't what you were expecting. So.
I'm similar to Katie, where I provide salary expectations right up front and let them know so that they can elect out if they wish to. I'm very straightforward about it. And then I will also kind of let them know the other perks like 401k match and any of that other information that they would be interested in. I think that if the recruiter brings it up, you can feel free to talk about it and kind of give them your salary expectations and what you have in mind. But like Katie said, there are some recruiters that are very put off though when you're the one to bring it up.
So at my organization, we actually ask on the application what your salary expectations are. We don't rule anybody out because of that. If we have a really well-qualified candidate, but they've asked $30,000 more than our budget, I would reach out to them and say, hey, we really want to talk to you, but I'm gonna let you know that's not going to be possible. And again, like Katie said, that's when I go into, but we have this much PTO and hybrid work schedule and all of our great benefits. So then in the phone, so I see that on the application. Then when we get into the phone screen, I ask again, what are your salary expectations? And I would say 95% of the time, for our younger, our early careerists, they will say something less than what they put on the application. And I'll remind them, on the application, you put this, did something change? Or I just want to make sure we're aligned. So my piece of advice here is, if you've done your research and you know your worth, stick to what you want, especially as you get further along in your career. You know, it's not a secret. We all need money to live. So don't sell yourself short just because you really want to get the job. If the organization wants you enough, they will try and make it work some way.
Yeah. And then I just wanted to add too, I often did a lot of education during some of my conversations. Someone would come with a certain market rate that they love Google, but Google can provide you with some contradicting information sometimes. And so they would come with a market rate that was definitely way off base than what we were going to be providing, which is based off of national averages. And so it's an opportunity, if they are pretty off base, to kind of educate, because they just might need to reset their expectations based off of the market versus what their research was. Most people can do pretty good market research and find that information, but sometimes it is a little bit off base. So it's just an open conversation and help them understand a little bit more. Even if that job is not a fit for them, they might help them down the road.
It's a great point, Katie. You've all made excellent points. And a lot of it comes back to having a good understanding of what that market rate is. And so what would be your advice in terms of how to identify that amount, especially if you're, someone who's making a career change, early on in your career, you're moving from one employer to another, maybe it's a different funding structure, salaries are likely to look different, or of course, our students who are soon to be graduating, how do they figure out that salary target to start those conversations?
It's a good question. I always, whenever I would do it, I know it's different and can look different for a lot of different roles, but Indeed or wherever they are that post kind of ranges, I would just look at so many different jobs with the titles that I was kind of looking for. But also noticed some organizations now post the job rate, the comp ranges. And so that'll almost give you an idea. I don't know if a lot of the ones in Indiana do it, but there's certain states now that are mandating that you have to, if you post a job, you have to post the salary range. But that being said, whenever I was working at IU Health, we had a lot of people that there were some websites that would pull your job and then give it its own kind of classification of a salary that was not realistic to what we were going to be even looking at. And so, yes, I think it's important, but I was always an open book whenever I worked in HR, not telling people salaries, but if someone asked me, hey, for a job this level and these expectations, what could I be expecting? And I'd let them kind of know a broad range of where we would potentially fall at IU Health, obviously giving the caveat that's based off of your years of experience, education, and kind of what you're bringing. And it could range from the low end to the high end. But I think it's important if you know people in HR or can kind of have one of those connections, they'll serve as a good resource for you whenever you just kind of bounce ideas off of them for what you're considering.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything you said. Also looking at, considering cost of living, where you're at in the type of organization that you have, because I'm an HR manager for a nonprofit in Indianapolis. I guarantee you there's an HR manager in corporate America, New York City, probably making 4 times as much as me. So just being realistic about where you're living and even taking a look at similar cities. If you're looking in Indianapolis, cities of similar size, organizations of similar size and field can help you as well, kind of be more realistic.
Yeah, I would agree with both of your points, especially being realistic if you're looking at a not-for-profit or corporate America, because the salaries are drastically different. And to know that going into it will set you up for success, excuse me. And I would say doing research, I didn't do a lot of research when I first came out. I just kind of settled. And then as I progressed through community, I've learned negotiation is key, because I get just coming in at the lower end and I didn't speak for myself. And now in the job that I'm in, I've learned to speak for myself and ask for more money.
That's a really, really helpful advice. And I particularly liked the comment, Katie, this idea that it is okay to ask people to give you ballparks. I think there's a taboo about asking someone how much they get paid. We don't do that. Generally, though, most people, especially you think about alums or colleagues or fellow professionals, it's pretty fair to say something like, what would be an estimated range of salary for someone in this type of role at your organization? You're not asking them their salary, you're asking what would be a general salary, a range of salary for someone in that type of role. And that can be really powerful to get you much more specific data than what you'll find in like a salary.com or a Glassdoor or some of these larger research sites. Great to get you started, but not always specific to cost of living, brand, to your point, and specific organization type as well. That's really, really helpful. Now, Katie D, you made a comment. Negotiation's really, really important. Our panelist is all female. I see a lot of our group on the call is female as well. This is a challenge, generally speaking, when we see who negotiates, who doesn't negotiate. We also know that people earlier in their careers are less likely to negotiate. They're feeling that anxiety. They want something, especially if you're making a big change in your career. There might be a willingness to just, take whatever and be happy and move on, but you're missing an opportunity potentially. So what would be your all's top piece of advice when you think about how someone should approach negotiation or how they go about that negotiation process?
I think one thing is understanding that negotiation just doesn't have to be about salary. I started my professional career in higher ed, and they told me on day one, nope, you are in a job class, there's no negotiation. But I could have negotiated PTO. I could have negotiated a start date. I could have negotiated, if you have a hybrid work environment or not. Some organizations are more lenient on that. So really take a look at like the benefits of an organization. And there's other things that maybe could be helpful to you that's not necessarily the dollar.
Yes, I would agree. My husband is a dentist actually, and we were just negotiating a contract for him. And so it's so true, looking at the benefits that they offer and negotiating vacation and asking the company if they'll pay for certain things to reimburse you. Like if you want to go get a certificate in a different program, if they'll pay for that. I mean, some people will pay for it, and I think it's open to discussion if you're very upfront and honest and come about it in the right way. And it's not all about pay, but knowing that negotiation is happening and it's okay to do, I think is very good to know going into the job search.
Mm-hmm. And I think knowing your worth, it's easy for a job to offer you is something that you get it and you're a little bit disappointed, and weigh the pros and cons of the rest of the benefits that they're offering, like they were mentioning. But just know, I mean, if it's something that you're not going to take and you want to negotiate, be able to explain why you're going to be a benefit to the organization, why you should deserve more money, base it off of the job description, the functions, how you can go above and beyond those, and just kind of sell yourself. But I also would recommend if you don't have a mentor, getting a mentor that has gone through some different roles and has promotions and has done some negotiating, because they can provide you a lot of advice too. And you can kind of sit there and have a conversation with them and practice negotiating. I think practicing negotiating is important because you want to enter that conversation confident, because most times when you're negotiating with a recruiter, you're negotiating because they want you there in the role. So yes, they might come off and play hardball and be like, no, sorry, we can't do this. But in the end, if you guys can come to a happy medium where maybe you're not getting everything you want, but you're going a little bit over, I think it's also important. We ran into this all the time, and I think organizations are getting a little bit better, but offers are based off of internal equity. So you have your people that are in the role in that job class, you kind of compare them all. You can't bring in Katie at 150,000 whenever you've got Bree over here at 120 and they have equal years of experience, same degree level, just because Katie wants to make more than Bree. So you really have to look at that and figure out, okay, if I let Katie have the job at 150, am I going to have to bring Bree up, or are we going to have to do some negotiation? Because that's the last thing you want to get into, is causing disruption in your internal equity, because then you're just opening yourself up to a lot of things. So
yeah, I agree.
Absolutely, really good insight and helpful to understand what's going on behind the scenes as we enter those conversations. Sometimes we only see them from our worldview. Well, we are at 6:43. That means that we have about 18 minutes left on the call. I want to make sure that we open this up to our guests today. So if there are any questions for our panelists, feel free to unmute yourself and or throw your question in the chat, and we will ask it of our panelists.
I actually have a question. I have an internship right now, and I will be graduating in May, and I have the opportunity to hold it for a year. How long would you guys recommend being in an internship role as a graduate, like someone who has a degree already?
have they voiced if there are full-time opportunities after the internship, or are they just solely having it as an internship? I don't know if you know that, but.
Well, it's at the VA, so yes, there should be opportunities after.
I would recommend, I don't know, I think being an internship for whenever you're a student, a year is fine when you're a student, I think, because you're still kind of learning. Internships usually provide you some flexibility with part-time where you can't always go full-time. But whenever you have your degree and unless there's a firm kind of offer at that year mark, I don't know, I kind of go back and forth, because if they're going to offer you, if it's an internship in one spot, or if they're kind of going to do a rotating internship where you might be able to gain some additional experience, I think that year is fine, but you might be missing out on some full-time opportunities if there's not going to be something at the end, at the finish line.
Thank you.
Other questions for our panelists on anything career oriented? Could be negotiating, interviewing, finding the right opportunity. Okay, we have one in the chat here. Do you feel like your negotiation process was harder for you as women?
To be transparent, I guess given like salary expectations, but I've never like come back with a counter offer as an applicant.
I have countered. I would say I don't know that it was difficult because I was a woman, but I went into it giving my counter offer knowing that it might not be that, or it might be the same, and we met in the middle. So I wouldn't say that it was hard or easy by any means. It's definitely a hard conversation to have, and it takes a lot of practice to have that conversation before going into it.
Yeah, and I have only ever negotiated one time, and they accepted my counter offer, so I didn't have to do a whole lot of negotiating, but I'm usually on the other end of the negotiating. I obviously have no bias in the who is negotiating. If they are qualified for the role and they're putting out good reasons why I should give them more money, and it's aligned with what we can do internally at our organization, and the hiring leaders aligned, then sure, I'm going to give you that amount of money.
Yeah. We have another question that's popped in. How did you go about finding a mentor? So a couple times throughout our conversation tonight, you all have mentioned the importance of having that person who's maybe gone before you or in your organization. How did you find those individuals, and what advice could you give around that?
I know for me, it started when I was in college, of connecting with professors and TAs, and Sarah has written recommendation letters for me, and I'm really grateful for that. So just making those connections. And then as you get into your professional roles, I would just kind of take a look at people in my organization and think, what could I learn from them? Do I want to be like them? What skills do they have that maybe I don't have and I want to learn from? And I was just really blunt of, hey, let's grab coffee. I'd love to learn more about what you do. People like talking about themselves and like sharing about their jobs. So if you just show interest and have, real questions and want to make a real connection, just go for it.
I found mine through, I think, the alumni, someone who had came to talk at our MHA orientation. I honestly don't know. Sarah, you might have connected me with her. It was Kara, Chamis Winterstein now, and then ended up taking an internship with her. And she was my boss for 6 or so months before I moved on. And so just kept that mentor relationship. But it was interesting that I got to work with my mentor, because she could see, obviously we had conversations outside of work, but then she was able to see my work ability, and actually was instrumental in getting me my next job after that internship.
Mine was actually one of my sorority advisors. So it was getting connected through college and then talking through her to meet other people.
Fantastic. I think they just have to happen somewhat organically. You have to be putting yourself out there, but it's kind of always that openness to who might be a good person to stay connected with along the way. And they change throughout different phases of your life as well. We have another question that's coming in the chat. For candidates that you're hiring or recruiting for, if the candidate has more education or more experience than your current leaders, does that adversely affect that candidate from proceeding to the next round? So, and William, correct me if I'm wrong in understanding your question. It sounds like if you're asking if you of the candidate have more experience than the person that would be the supervisor of that role, is that going to adversely affect you? I'm wondering if we'll go with that as yeah, we'll say that's what we're saying. Do we see that being an adverse impact to have a candidate be maybe even more qualified for a position than the leadership for that particular role?
I don't think so. I think at a lot of organizations, you see internal promotions that happen where people are being given opportunities where maybe there is a director that's hired into a role that then is fresh, has a couple years of leadership experience, is pretty young, but has direct reports that are been in the business for 20, 25 plus years they're okay being in that job though. They're not looking for promotions. They're not looking to advance. That's kind of where they want to be in their career. So I don't think it has an adverse effect, but I think that if you also see a job, and I did this as a recruiter, if I saw a job, someone applied, they were way more too experienced for the job. The organization has several openings. So if that's a good candidate and you want to talk to them, kind of can fit them into another role maybe, or ask them about their interests. And that's kind of part of it, just making connections and trying to apply and seeing if you can get in with a recruiter, because oftentimes if you're going to be a good match with the organization, they'll try to fit you in somewhere.
Yep, totally agree.
Yes. Another question's come in to us from Dakota, and I think this is a great one. So how do you keep touch with your connections? She points out that it sounds like these networks seem to get very large. How do you manage that network that you've built professionally? How do you keep up? She mentioned someone told her once to send Christmas cards. What is your all strategy for staying in touch, staying really, truly, genuinely connected to the people in your existing network?
For me, LinkedIn's been really helpful. That's, maybe not as personal, but just if you see that they posted something, like it or reach out to them in a message. But I also keep like a Excel spreadsheet of kind of like people I want to stay in touch with. And I will send them like life updates. So, hey, I graduated with my master's in public admin, or hey, I got this new position. And just keeping them updated on your life. And then in return, they normally keep you updated and then have the occasional coffee, the occasional lunch. It doesn't have to be every month kind of thing. But just keeping them updated on the big things in life.
I would agree. I use LinkedIn for the main point of touch, and then I will also ask to go to coffee or have lunch or dinner occasionally, just to kind of connect and hear where they're at and talk about where I am and see if there's anything that we can help each other with.
Same. I use LinkedIn a lot. And I think just reaching out to, like you guys said, providing life updates and getting together with people and staying connected, even if it's not very often. It's hard to keep all those connections and keep them active, but a lot of the people on the other end are going through the same thing as well. So they're not wanting to get coffee with you every week, probably because they don't have time. And just understanding that and creating those lasting relationships where you can connect with them and pick up kind of right where you left off.
Great advice. Other questions from our guests today?
I do have a quick question. When it comes to applying for a position that or you feel that you might be overqualified for, and things don't work out, like the pay isn't what you expected or something like that, how would you, as an applicant, go about reaching out to that recruiter to see what other positions they might think you would be better qualified for?
I can take this. So I have had this happen with my pool of candidates. I have a greater pool of candidates than I do jobs typically. And I'm always open to them emailing me and asking if there's anything that they could have done different. Is there anything that they can look back at and have a better conversation or make them stand out more, and just seeing, is there another opportunity that would kind of align and meet their needs better? I'm usually very open to talking with them and seeing if there's something else within our organization that I can give them.
We have another question that's popped into the chat. Did you have any cultural challenges in the workplace, being on the younger end of the career pool when you were early careerists and are early careerists? Not aging anyone anyway here.
I know for me, A little bit of it was about confidence of, okay, I have this degree, but I don't really have any professional experience other than some student jobs. So kind of how do I work my way into this new workplace? So for that, it's just a lot of people, I think, go through that of just trying to navigate the real world and how, if you're working in an office, if you're working a 9 to 5, how that works. And you just learn with time. But my advice on that would just be, again, stay confident, and just kind of reach out if you do have questions, if you do need help. That's what I tell all of our new employees, especially our younger ones, of we know you don't know everything. That's why we're here. That's why we have a team full of people that want to help you. So please reach out and ask questions.
I think it's also important to have those conversations with your hiring leader, you're kind of the person you're going to directly report to, because if they're invested in your success, they'll take a true kind of stance to schedule meetings with some key players that you need to meet with to kind of get a well-rounded understanding of the organization that you're coming into, kind of the responsibilities and who to meet with, just to kind of keep you networked and connected within the organization. And that'll really help you understand culturally and just relationship wise who you connect with, who you might need to work on a relationship with. And also finding groups at IU Health. We had kind of emerging leaders, and I can't remember what the one group was called, but where you could connect with other early careerists or people that are young professionals, what it was called. And they host events and a lot of educational things like this. And so you could be surrounded with people similar to you and build that cohort.
Wonderful. Well, I want to be cognizant of time, so we will end with one last question that rolled in here into the chat. And that is, if someone on this call wants to connect with any of you, would you be comfortable with them reaching out on LinkedIn? And I think this is just a good opportunity to sort of help them understand what is the best way to reach out to someone on LinkedIn, especially if they've connected, maybe following a panel like this or reaching out to a recruiter. What is the best strategy for approaching someone like that on LinkedIn?
I would say that when I have people that connect with me and send me a personal message, I'm usually quick to respond back because I keep it on my business phone, my personal phone, and it's on my work computer. So if you message me, you'll probably get a response within 24 hours, and I'm always open and happy to respond.
And I think the personal message is important. Unless you know someone and they know you and they know you're going to connect with them on LinkedIn, but if you maybe met them at a recruiting event, you can add a note like, hey, I met you at this event. I'm kind of interested in pursuing our network and connection here and seeing if there's any opportunities in your organization that might be a fit for me. Or if you've applied for one, that's kind of a connection to add into that message, just to try to connect that person to the reason that they're connecting with you, and gives it a little bit more of a personal touch.
Yeah, I totally agree with the Katies.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Thank you. Brianne, it only happened once. That's pretty good, all things considered. Brianne, KDO, and KDD, thank you so much for taking the time to spend your evening with us. I think we all learned a lot. And Elena, thank you so much to you and ACHE and IHEN for hosting this fantastic event.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks. Bye.